Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. So we have been examining Sutta number 38 in the Middle Length Discourses. This is the Mahatanhasankhaya Sutta, the greater or longer discourse on the destruction of craving. Last time I went through a detailed explanation of the formula for dependent origination according to the sequence of arising and the sequence of cessation. And now I want to take just the very last part of the sutta, which begins on page 358. With paragraph 26. Now, the way I understand this particular passage in relation to the rest of the sutta, you see the middle part of the sutta, which we covered last week, gave a rather abstract presentation of the formula of dependent origination. So depending on ignorance, volitional formations arise. Depending on volitional formations, consciousness. From consciousness, name and form. From name and form, the six sense spaces. Onto contact, feeling, craving, clinging. Karmically active existence, birth, then old age and death. So this is all very abstract. So now the way I understand the section beginning with paragraph 26, the purpose here is to show in concrete terms, in actual experiential, biological, and psychological terms, what the formula of dependent origination is actually illustrating. It doesn't begin exactly at the beginning, but it starts off, with the conditions for what is called the descent of the embryo to take place. So the text begins, the descent of the embryo takes place through the union or coming together of three things, three conditions. And now it's called here the descent of the embryo. It's a kind of, maybe you call this a metaphorical term, or it's a word used, an expression used a little bit loosely. Okay, so the Pali expression here for what's translated descent of the embryo is kabas avakanti. Avakanti means descending, coming down. And the word gabha, or this is the Sanskrit garbha, ordinarily can mean either the womb or the embryo. And so when the text speaks about the descent of the embryo, it doesn't mean that the embryo is actually existing someplace in outer space, and then it comes down into the womb. But rather the expression is used here somewhat metaphorically to mean that a new being becomes conceived or enters into the womb and begins the process of embryonic development. Okay, so now the Buddha mentions that three things are necessary for this descent of the embryo to take place. First, there has to be the union, that's the sexual union of the mother and the father. But if that occurs and the mother is not in season, it's not her time to conceive, and the Gandhabba is not present, in this case, no descent of an embryo takes place. I'm going to go through the whole series, then I'll explain what is meant by the Gandhabba, or at least what I understand is meant by the Gandhabba. Okay, that's the first possibility, the first case. The second case is where there is the union of the mother and the father, and the mother is in season, she's fertile. It's her time to conceive, but the Gandhabba is not present. In this case, too, no descent of the embryo takes place. So that is the second case when there's no descent of the embryo. Then the third case, when there is the union or sexual intercourse of mother and father, and the mother is in season, and the Gandhabba is present. Through the union of these three things, the descent of the embryo takes place. Okay, so now the whole passage, the meaning of the whole passage hinges on the meaning of this word, which I left in the Pali, Gandhabba. And this is the Sanskrit word, Gandharva. Now the word Gandharva is used in several senses in the early Buddhist literature. The usual sense is a kind of celestial being, kind of spiritual being, or maybe we could say supernatural being, that live in forests, in trees, in fruit trees, in flowers, they're associated with flowers, fruit trees, woods. And they're somewhat almost like semi-gods, half-divine type beings. But they're not living in the heavenly world, but in close association with the earth. And so normally we don't see them, but those who have developed the supernormal power of vision, the divine eye, are able to see the Gandharvas. Okay, another sense that the word takes, I'm not sure whether we find this in the Pali literature, but this I think becomes typical maybe in later literature, perhaps in Mahayana sutras. Perhaps there are some precedents for this in the Pali literature. The Gandhabba is a kind of celestial musician. These are the musicians in the world of the gods. Maybe if you go into the big Buddha hall and then you walk inside, there's a kind of inner semicircle around the large Buddha statue, and then there are some images of the Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and then divine devas, and then there are some beings who are playing musical instruments. Those are probably the Gandharvas. Okay, now there's a third use of the word Gandharva, or Gandharva, which occurs only in this passage. It doesn't occur elsewhere in the Pali Canon. Only in this passage and a few other passages which are similar to this. And the way I understand the use of the word here, it means a being, let us say the form of a living being which has separated from its previous existence and is waiting around for the mother and the father to have sexual relations in order to enter into the womb and take rebirth. The texts themselves don't really give an explicit explanation of what is meant by Gandharva in this sense. But the way I've come to understand it, it's through some contemporary literature that I've read from those. There are researchers who have investigated, reported cases of people with rebirth memories. And so there are some cases of people who remember their previous life not through developing special meditative powers, but somehow this memory just remains with them. And so they actually remember their previous life, what were the events happening up to the time of their death. And then, in the cases I've read, they actually experience their death from a kind of detached perspective as they're getting into the last stages of their final illness. They experience it seems as though they are separating from their physical body, but they still have a sense of possessing the same physical body. And so, but it's a kind of very subtle form of their original physical body. So they see themselves separating from the physical body, moving around the room. Usually they sort of drift up to the ceiling and then look down at themselves, maybe lying on the deathbed. They might see their relatives come and start looking at the body, trying to resuscitate the body, to get the vital organs working again. But at a certain point it becomes too late. And so then they might see the relatives, maybe a doctor comes, takes the pulse, checks the breathing, tells something to the relatives. They see the relatives start weeping, and maybe beating the ground, pulling their hair, and crying out, "Ayo, ayo, how miserable we are." And in some cases, the person who's separated tries to communicate with their living relatives and tries to tell them, "I'm still here, I'm still here." And they actually experience themselves talking, but the living relatives show no response. But in one case that I read about, though the human relatives showed no response, there was a dog in the room, the family pet. And the family pet was looking up at the ceiling and barking. But the people were completely oblivious to the presence of anybody else in the room. Okay, then maybe a few days later, they go to the cemetery, they see the funeral taking place, they can witness, the body being put into the grave or being cremated. And they're still trying to communicate, but no communication takes place. Till at a certain point, they give up on this, and then they find themselves just moving around. They have no sense of the passage of how much time is passing, no sense of place or position. It seems that they could cross over great distances just in a few seconds. And this goes on could be perhaps several months, several years, so it seems to them like a relatively short time, till they find themselves attracted to a particular couple. And then they hang around that couple until the couple has sexual relations. Then when that happens, they feel themselves drawn towards the woman, and then they feel themselves sort of pulled into the body of the woman, and then at that point, they lose their consciousness until they take birth again. Okay, so it seems to me, this is sort of my hypothesis, that what is meant by the Gandhabba is that being which is separated from its previous physical identity and is sort of moving about, waiting for the conditions, for the appropriate conditions to arise, all the right karmic conditions, people, a couple with whom they might have some karmic affinity, who are providing the right kind of economic, social conditions, cultural conditions, all of these appropriate conditions for them to reappear in human form. So when all of those conditions come together with the appropriate mother and father, then the being can take rebirth. Yeah, so this, I think, would be the way rebirth would take place in the case of a human rebirth. It could be that in the case of a heavenly rebirth or a rebirth in the hell realm, the rebirth could take place almost immediately after death, because the heavenly beings, the hell beings, are spontaneously reborn. So that they don't depend for their rebirth upon having karmic relations with particular other beings in that realm. But in the case of a human rebirth, and presumably an animal rebirth, there have to be the appropriate conditions. And so at the time that a person dies, it's extremely unlikely that all of these right karmic conditions have come together for them to take rebirth instantaneously. So there has to be, this is my hypothesis, some kind of intermediate state in which the being is moving about or subsisting until the right karmic conditions appear. And when I tell a story about the being being separated from the body, hovering about, attending his own funeral, I'm not making up stories. This is actually cases that I've read about. If you want to check this out for yourself, there's a book. It's by he was a British Buddhist and researcher. His name is Francis Story. And he worked together with a professor who had been at the University of Virginia. He's passed away some years ago. His name was Ian Stevenson. And together they published a book called Rebirth as Doctrine and Experience. The first part gives sort of theoretical or doctrinal explanations of the Buddhist teaching on rebirth. Then the second part consists of actual case studies prepared with fairly rigorous examination of individuals who have rebirth recollections. Then Dr. Ian Stevenson has compiled quite a few larger books on collections of rebirth cases that he's investigated. One of the earliest is called 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. And then he's also compiled a collection of rebirth cases. I don't know if you're interested, you could just check out his name on the internet. Ian, I-A-N, then Stevenson with a V. Okay, so the way rebirth is expressed here, it's the union of the three conditions, that is the coming together of sexual relations of mother and father. The mother is fertile and the Gandhabba is present. So in that case, what is called the descent of the embryo takes place. Now, what is actually meant in sort of the ultimate sense by the descent of the embryo is the arising of consciousness in the womb. It doesn't mean that the being that is reborn is fully conscious and then starts thinking, what's on TV tonight? Or any interesting news on the internet? Or doesn't start thinking, what is my mommy going to prepare for dinner tonight? But it's a very, very primitive type of consciousness, perhaps corresponding to the consciousness of a one-celled organism, you know, like a protozoan, like paramecium or amoeba. Just one cell arises, but when that one cell arises, consciousness links up with it, and that is the beginning of the life, you say, the development of life, the development of the living being, or the beginning of the embryonic process. And when consciousness links up or connects with the fertilized egg, we have simultaneously the arising of what is called nama-rupa, name and form. Because consciousness doesn't occur on its own, but when consciousness appears, whenever it arises, it brings along with it the functions of consciousness. And the main functions of consciousness are feeling, perception, and volition. And so the one-celled organism will be the rupa, the form or body. And when consciousness connects with that fertilized egg, then there will occur some kind of feeling, a very basic, very simple feeling. A pleasant, painful feeling, or neutral feeling. There will be very, very subtle perceptions taking place, very primordial perceptions. And there'll be some degree of volition or intention, especially at the moment of when consciousness links to the egg, then there will be the intention or volition of starting the new life. Okay, now as the embryo is maturing in the mother's womb, the cell is dividing and dividing and dividing. Then as the process of cell division goes on, over time, the very simple sense organs start to emerge out of the embryo, in the fetus. Even at the moment of conception, we have what is called technically the body base. So the one cell fertilized egg, which is connected with consciousness, is now functioning as the body faculty. So it's just one cell, but that is the seed of the body. And so it's functioning like the physical body. It's sensitive to the tactile sensations of its environment. But as it starts to divide and subdivide, very simple, eyes will appear, ears will start to take shape, hands and legs will emerge, nose will emerge, the mouth will take shape, the tongue will start to develop. And so through these sense organs, as they're developing, at least the capacity for experience, different types of sensory experience will emerge. Okay, so now the text continues and it says, the mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Now we have modern methods of giving, of parturition, of giving birth. But in ancient India, as in much of the ancient world, when a woman became pregnant as the pregnancy advanced, there was always the question, is she going to survive the pregnancy or not? Or will she survive the birth process or not? And probably a fairly large percentage of both maternal deaths and natal deaths. Is that the expression? Okay, so then at the end of 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth, again with much anxiety as a heavy burden. And then when the child is born, she nourishes it with her own blood. For the mother's breast milk is called blood in the Noble One's discipline. It's a very powerful statement, because we always think of the blood as being the essence of a person's life. And I guess it's from blood that transmits to the breast basic biochemicals that go into the production of milk. And so the breast milk is the mother's, in a sense, it's the mother's own blood that she's using to nurture her child. Okay, so now, over time, the child grows up and his faculties mature. Okay, so now the sense faculties are starting to develop. And so the child plays at various games. Okay, here the text mentions the kind of games that children would play in ancient India in the Buddha's time. Maybe some of them we still have with us. Toy plows. It was an agricultural culture, so they would plow in the field. Nowadays, children, they like to play doctor and nurse. Tit-cat, I don't know what that is, somersaults, toy windmills, toy measures, toy cars. Do they have cars in ancient India? Toy bows and arrows. Okay, so in our culture, they'll have little kids will have baseball bats, football, basketball. Really younger ones, unfortunately, they have toy guns and rifles and fighter planes. Okay, so then when the child grows up and his faculties mature still further, now the youth enjoys himself provided and endowed with the 5 chords or 5 kinds of sensual pleasure, that is with forms cognizable by the eye, sounds, odors, flavors, and tactile sensations. So here we're reaching the point now, this is sort of illustrating how through the 6 sense faculties, contact is taking place. And then as one makes contact with the different sense objects, one is experiencing feelings. And these feelings are described, the kind of sense objects are described as those that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, those that give pleasant feeling. And these are connected with sensual desire and rajaniya. Maybe provocative of lust is too strong. Now I use the word tantalizing or exciting. Okay, so this could be taken to illustrate the stages of dependent origination from the sense faculties through feeling. The 6 sense faculties, contact, and feeling. Okay, so now with the next section, section number 30, we're going to see how from the arising of feelings, craving will set in, and then start once again the process of causation that will produce another turn in the cycle of existence. Okay, so on seeing a form with the eye, he lusts after it, or he becomes attracted to it and attached to it if it is pleasant, and he dislikes it if it is displeasing or unpleasant. So he abides with mindfulness of the body unestablished. He doesn't set up mindfulness, and he has a limited mind. The mind is limited by the ideas that the way to happiness, to true enjoyment, is just through the indulgence in sensual pleasures. And he does not understand, as it actually is, the deliverance of mind and deliverance of wisdom, where those evil or bad, unwholesome mental states cease without remainder. Okay, so now that he's experiencing pleasant objects, displeasing, unpleasant objects, he becomes engaged in what is called favoring and opposing. Or maybe more simply, we could say liking and disliking, or attraction and repulsion. So this is the way the ordinary mind functions when it experiences whatever kind of object it meets through the senses. It's always drawn towards the pleasant and repelled, turned away by what is unpleasant. Okay, now comes the statement, a little bit interesting. He says, whatever feeling he feels, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. Okay, normally we can see how one can take delight in pleasant feeling, but how can one take delight in painful feeling or neutral feeling? What do you think?
He identifies, cherishes. People can have very unpleasant feelings and really identify with them. Oh,
Yeah.
I suffer so.
Yeah.
Kind of cherishing it.
Yeah. So some people they like to undergo kind of feelings of misery.
Yeah.
Deprivation.
Yeah.
It gives them some kind of sense of maybe self-importance.
Mm-hmm.
Andre?
I think it just reinforces the sense of self
Yeah.
that everybody is attached to.
Yeah, pretty much that's what Tracy said. That he sort of it strengthens the sense of identification. It's a kind of an interesting observation from the standpoint of psychology.
Another thought I have is sometimes it's just hard to leave the mind. Not that we're delighting in it, but it touches the mind and we just can't get rid of it.
Yeah, that's also true. Sometimes these sort of bitter feelings sort of just persist in the mind. And it isn't so much that one delights in it, but one does remain holding to it. And that it becomes difficult to let go of those disagreeable feelings. Any other thoughts about this?
With neutral, I think it may be, in the case of neither pleasant nor unpleasant,
Yeah.
that situation in life where if one doesn't understand someone else's reaction, they insist it must not exist. That, again, that idea of holding.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand.
Why are you so upset? Why does this upset you? Or why do you value this so much? That, again, it's a way of proclaiming yourself as the measure.
So this is the person
The neutral.
who's criticizing the other.
Well, I'm thinking, how do you delight in a state that's neither pleasant nor unpleasant?
Yeah.
And I think it must be that situation where someone obstinately insists this is not a problem, or this is not to be delighted in.
So that's from the perspective of the person who is criticizing somebody else, is that it?
Right, or just not even necessarily criticizing, but affirming their own view
Yeah.
in a way.
Okay, maybe. Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I think the idea is that it's something that one can afford to ignore. As you say, I don't have to pay any attention to this, so you can blot it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so since you can blot it out, you don't need to understand it. And so you think you treat things that you feel as neither pleasant or unpleasant as simply non-existent, not actually part of the world.
Yeah. How about if any of you, have you ever gone through really painful, maybe painful illness? You have a throbbing headache, a terrible sore throat, and it subsides and you just return to the bland world of the everyday. And then it seems wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Then you start thinking, how is it that I never really appreciated this? We think of a person, maybe this is the typical, what they call the couch potato. Nothing really exciting is going on, but he's just sitting on the couch with his remote in his hand, flipping through television stations. Anything good on? Click, click, click. How's this program? No, click, click. And so it's just kind of dull sense of peace and security. But it's a comfortable state, so he holds on to it. Okay, so then the text continues. Okay, as whatever feeling he feels, here it's translated, he delights in that feeling. He welcomes it and remains holding to it. Okay, as he does so, delight arises in him. Actually, this would be probably a stronger degree of delight than what is called the delighting in that feeling. And then the text says, now delight in feelings is clinging. So this delighting in feelings, we could actually say what's called, okay, whatever feeling he feels, pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, he welcomes it. Maybe that much seems to be the working of tanha, or craving. And then holding to it, I could actually say when he remains holding to it, that is really what is the clinging. So now we're moving from the craving, the craving is seeking delight in feeling. So maybe another idea occurred to me in relation to painful feeling, is that of course, in one way you could say one delights in painful feeling in certain situations, but the mind naturally seeks pleasant feeling. So when one experiences the painful feeling, then one wants to escape from it. And normally the way one tries to escape from it is by finding sources of pleasant feeling. So maybe that's why people like exciting spectacles so much. Or the neither painful nor pleasant feeling is just sort of dull feeling of everyday life. And so, people have the expression, TGIF, thank God it's Friday, because Monday to Friday is the work week, so you always have to do work. When Friday afternoon comes, we're free, we can go out and enjoy ourselves. And so then that sort of feeling on Friday evening when one leaves the work, that could be sort of seeking delight in feelings. But poor Kaiti, for her it's, thank God it's Monday. she works Saturday and Sunday and gets Tuesday and Wednesday off. Okay, so this then seeking delight, turning to pleasant objects of the senses, that is the working of tanha, or craving. And then this is followed when one acquires the objects of craving. Then there comes the holding to them, or the attachment to them. And that is upadhana, that is clinging. Okay, then when there's the clinging to the sources of pleasant feeling, then one starts engaging in various activities, either based to protect the objects of clinging, or else to find new sources of pleasure and enjoyment, new activities based on craving. And all of this is now building up fresh karma. One is engaging in new activities. The activities are driven by will or volition or intention. And it's these intentional activities that are creating karma. And this karma is building up or constructing the prospect for a new future existence. A future existence which will be the receptacle or the field for the ripening of one's present karma, one's new karma. And then when this life comes to an end, then with those karmically constructive activities as condition, then there takes place birth. And then with birth as condition, there takes place aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And so such is the origin of the whole mass of dukkha, of suffering. And then the same thing, basically, this whole paragraph number 30 is unfolded or developed based simply on experience through the eye. But then the next paragraph is built up, takes each of the other sense modalities as its basis. And so we have here the 6 sense bases taken as a whole, being our instruments or means of making contact with the world. Contact with the world generates feelings. In quest of pleasant feelings, there arises craving, so which we seek out pleasant experience, and we seek to escape from painful or dull, ordinary experience. The activities rooted in craving, then from craving there comes the clinging to the pleasant experiences and the pushing away of the unpleasant experiences. And then based on this craving or clinging and pushing away, favoring and opposing, there comes the creation and accumulation of new karma. And then that new karma is what is repeatedly building up, constructing a new stage, a new turn in the round of birth and death. And then with birth as condition, there comes aging and death and so on. Okay, any questions now on this part that we've covered so far? A lot of questions. Okay. Somebody says, for in vitro fertilization, what happens in the Petri dish? See, I think that might be dealt with in Sutta number 50. Or, no, I can't find anything in the Nikayas. So let me just use my divine eye for a moment. Yeah. In fact, I don't know, but okay, let us suppose, okay, there's what's called test tube babies. Okay, so in this case, there's no descent of the embryo into the mother's womb, but probably conception takes place in the mother's womb because that provides a condition for, normal condition for conception to take place. So actually what is done, I mean, I don't really know the science of this, but I think what is just done in the Petri dish is to fertilize the egg. Then once the egg becomes fertile and starts to divide, then it's planted into the mother's womb. That's correct.
Yes.
They don't actually develop the whole embryo
No.
in a dish itself. And is it always successful or sometimes?
No.
Okay. So okay, this is the way I would, this is what I would understand. Okay, the fertilization of the egg is starting to provide a physical condition. So now we have the fertilized ovum, which is just exactly what takes place if it's the mother's season and mother and father have sexual relations. So the egg can get fertilized, and it doesn't necessarily develop into a fetus or an embryo. When it's planted into, whether it's planted into the mother's womb or whether it's naturally, the egg is naturally impregnated there, whether it's going to develop into a fetus or not depends. One of the conditions is whether or not there is that Gandhava present. So in the case of fertilization in the Petri dish, and the ovum is planted into the mother's womb, if there are still suitable physical conditions and if the Gandhava comes, then there will be conception. If either the physical conditions are not right, then there can be a termination of the pregnancy. Or if the physical conditions are appropriate, but the Gandhava is not present, then the pregnancy won't, or the conception won't take place. Or embryonic development won't take place. Okay, I think this is continuing the question. For in vitro fertilization in the Petri dish, the father and mother are not at the scene, and the doctor is almost playing God for the fertilization of the sperm and egg. How does the Gandhava grab the cells? Let's see, Sutta number 59. Nothing. Okay. How does the I don't think that the Gandhava will grab the cells while it's in the Petri dish. I think that the Gandhava is sort of waiting around for the for the ovum to get planted into the mother's womb. That's just my supposition. Okay, based on these cases of past life recall, is the Gandhava some kind of disembodied conscious life energy? Okay, this is an interesting and important question, because from the cases that I've read, the Gandhava is not really disembodied, but it's existing in a form body. It has a physical body which is of a very subtle matter, so that we human beings don't see it. But they see themselves as having the body, a body which they identify as being the same body as that of the being that they were in the life that just came to an end. You know, so if, like, I were to pass away now, heart attack, my Gandhava separates, I'll still be wearing monk's robes with a rust-colored sweater. I'll still, well, I don't think that they have mirrors in that realm, but look at my hands, still the hands look the same, feet, legs look the same. So they still identify, I'm still the same person, but it's a kind of subtle matter, or maybe it's just a mentally created type of form. But they identify themselves as having a body. Okay, can the Gandhabba be taken as the same as the Hindu Atman? The Hindus consider the Atman as being unchanging, but the Buddhists don't accept an eternal existent like the Atman. I don't think that the descriptions of the Gandhabba that we find in these rebirth cases really correspond to that of the Atman. The Atman is taken to be something which is infinite, formless, indescribable, inconceivable. But this is no more indescribable or inconceivable in our ordinary physical body and life process. It's just that it's disconnected from the ordinary physical body. Well, many questions here about the Gandhabba. Okay, does the Gandhabba contain the memories of the life? If not, then how is recollection of past life possible? Okay, the Gandhabba, again, almost nothing is said about this in the Buddhist text, but in these cases that I've read about, as I said, the Gandhabba identifies itself as being the same as the person who's passed away, so they must have some memories of the life that has just come to an end. And in some way, the memories of the previous life are imprinted on the stream of consciousness, so they're always potentially available to recall. But once, what happens when, probably is at the moment of conception,